Hello, I'm Andrew Hall, and this is Dead Hand Radio. My guest for this episode is Remote Viewer Russell Pickering. Russell is a student of Paul H. Smith's Remote Viewing Instructional Services, RVIS, and graduated from Paul's advanced CRV course, and he's now an operational remote viewer. He has spent over a decade researching the topic of remote viewing, and he's a returning guest to this show. If you have not seen him on this podcast before, you can check that out. And he goes into a lot of detail about his background, his history, and his interests. This episode is titled The History of Remote Viewing, and we'll be discussing how the program came into existence, who are the original members of the Project Stargate, and some of the fascinating targets that team members were tasked with. We'll also talk about some resources and training options available for those interested in learning remote viewing for themselves. Welcome back to Dead Hand Radio, Russell.
Thank you, Andrew. How have you been?
I'm good. I'm doing pretty good. And if you don't mind, real quickly, answer the question of how you've been doing, but also since the last time we talked publicly, would you please give a little bit of an update on what's been going on with you around the topic of remote viewing?
Well, everything's going good here. I stay involved as much as possible with assisting people with their learning of remote viewing. I participate in a couple of the Facebook remote viewing groups. I do continuous study. One of my favorite things now that the information is coming out more readily from Ingo's archives is to look back, look at the historical documents. And for the most part, I stay pretty busy.
Cool. Uh, so, in the intro that I just read about you, I talked about you being a operational remote viewer.
Yes.
Now, is that something that you do as a freelancer, or are you work for a company, or how do you get tasked to do operational remote viewing?
The way it has worked for me is you sign an agreement with a project manager who has a remote viewing operation. I had worked for three, now I work for two. And what happens is you just offer yourself as a viewer for their team. Myself, I don't take financial compensation. I refer it out to animal welfare, primarily, to be honest, raccoons. And for me, it's a matter of reciprocity. What happens in operational remote viewing? Just very simply, you generally get an email, who's interested, like a group email out to the team. You step up, then you get an email with just the target reference number. You go to work, you do your session, format it, type out a summary, and then send it to the project manager. Sometimes you get feedback, sometimes you don't. And it's quite a joy when you do get feedback and aspects of a case have been resolved. The way teams work, it's like everybody, like the blind man and the elephant. One viewer has this knack, the other viewer has this, and by the time you put it all together, a project manager, generally with professional remote viewers, gets a very good picture of what they need to answer the client's request.
Okay, cool. Did I give you an opportunity to give a little bit of your background, how you got interested into remote viewing?
Sure, I'll make it very short.
Okay.
I've spoken about it in a couple of different places. I was just cruising the internet one day, came on what basically is a conspiracy website. Over in the advertisement bar, I saw the word remote viewing, and I don't know why, but I just zoomed in on it and clicked. That click led me to the controlled remote viewing manual that was originally written as working notes by Tom McNear, Paul Smith, and then Ingo's original 4 students took that and their notes and made a manual. Ingo then endorsed that manual in a very nice letter. And once I read that manual, I was just, I'm just like, wow, I've got to figure this out. So originally, I contacted Paul. He had a very long booking, and I was being very impatient. So I shopped around, found Ed Dames was having a live weekend training in Nevada. Signed up immediately, went there for that. Found myself even more intrigued and interested. Came home, took his DVD, his basic DVD set, then his master's tips. That method that Ed teaches is called technical remote viewing, or TRV, which is a modification, self-created modification of CRV, or what has become known as controlled remote viewing. I found myself not quite as good as I was hoping, and eventually kind of quit doing sessions. During that experience, a friend of mine who also took the DVDs, she did incredible work, which was absolutely convincing that this did work. What I did then was transition to study only. I spent 6 years just reading and studying and watching every video, everything humanly possible. Suddenly, out of the blue, a little over 3 years ago, it just hit me, get back into this. So I got a hold of Paul. He had a class opening. I signed up. And then over the course of just a little over 3 years, I took and graduated his basic course, his sketching course, his intermediate course, his operational course, and then finally his advanced course. And then I finished the advanced homework and got my certificate. After that, and actually a little bit during that, people kind of reached out and said, hey, would you be willing to do some viewing for us? So right now I'm down to 2.
Okay, cool. That's well, it's nice to hear that you came pretty much right out of the gate because you just graduated earlier this year, or was it late last year?
It was back in December, I believe.
Okay. Um, so yeah, I just want to say a quick thank you to everybody in the chat who is watching right now. Awesome for you guys to be here. Uh, I saw Carl Vibe came on earlier. Rodrigo, Santa Maria, Bill Osborne. Um, Bill Osborne says, I think Mr. Pickering is a stand-up guy.
Hello, Bill. Thanks for being here. And thank you guys, the rest of you too, as well. I appreciate it.
Uh, I don't know if I mentioned Rodrigo Vieira. Rodrigo is a really cool person. Jack Ryan, also very cool person. I've had communications with those guys offline as well as in the chat. Thank you guys for being here. If you guys have any questions, feel free to ask. We'll try to get to those. We're going to do a little bit of talk about the military history of remote viewing, and then we're going to talk a little bit about the expanded history of remote viewing. And Russell has a lot of information about that area, and so we'll get into that. And I'm sure you guys are going to have some questions. It's going to be a fun show. Um, Also, I just want to mention that a friend of mine, probably a lot of people in the chat know this person, Dave Partridge, Shadows of Your Mind magazine, just dropped a new issue today. In that issue, there is an article about Ingo Swann by Deborah Katz, who's had access to his estate archives, and I think she spent approximately 3 years rifling through those, helping to organize those. And she put an article out there in the latest issue of Shadows of Your Mind magazine. So thank you to Dave for bringing that to the public. There's also a ton of great information about UFOs and the topics that we're all here interested in. So you guys check out that um, that issue of the magazine, and um, good, good. So, real quick, for anybody who is not familiar with remote viewing, Russell, I wrote this description, kind of hybridized it based on what's already out there. But if you don't mind, I'll read this to you, and then you could correct any parts of it that I might be incorrect on.
Okay, if I can back up for just one quick second, though, I would like to say I did read that article that Deborah wrote, and I really enjoyed it.
Awesome.
Deborah,
I haven't had a chance to read it yet, so no spoilers.
no, I won't.
Okay.
The end, no. So Deborah actually uh, asked me to look at archival material that had not been released to the public. There was an area of Ingo study that they didn't really understand, and they knew that I did. So thanks to Deborah, she brought me into the ability to spend the last couple of years myself going through these unpublished aspects of the archives that are now slowly but surely being brought online into public view. Also, just as a quick reference to Deborah, her and her associate John Knowles just put a book on Amazon about associative remote viewing, which is something a lot of people are interested in. You can pre-order it on Amazon, and then the Kindle edition will be ready September 1st.
Very cool. And I forgot that you know Deborah, and you've actually had access to those archives as well, which is where you did a lot of your research.
Yeah,
I presume.
she opened a lot of doors for me, and
Oh,
that's
cool.
why I always offer, I guess, reciprocity to say, she's working hard, and I really did like this article. It was very well done.
Cool. So, there's a question in the chat that I want to get to right now,
Sure.
because we were talking a little bit about your background. And David Powell says, I was wondering if Russell would share some of his very interesting training in remote viewing, the people that you've come in contact with in particular.
Well, okay. In the advanced course, you do get training on remote viewing people. That is not to be taken lightly or frivolously. For instance, I would never, on any sort of a personal whim, even think about remote viewing somebody else. What's fascinating about that, and in particular, the person that I was tasked with was a person who's deceased. And you still have access to, whether you want to call it an information pattern of that person in the so called matrix, or is there an actual living aspect? So, in the case of this particular situation, I was being monitored and really got some powerful, overwhelmingly powerful emotional impressions. And this person had spent some time in a concentration camp. And the emotions that I felt, it took me 10 minutes to basically cry, grieve, get that out of my system. It hit me hard. And then once that was all cleared up, I was actually able, and it's the only time I've had an audible, like it sounded like it was in the room. It wasn't like in your head remembering what a footstep sounded like. It was Nazi jackboots on a wooden floor.
Mm.
And I still get chills from that event. Then the monitor said, move to a period of time where this individual was happy and successful. All of a sudden, I just felt this exuberance and this vivaciousness. It happened to be a female who was a French resistance fighter. And when she had set out to help people and make the world a better place, help people go free, it was just an incredible sensation of inspiration. And then as her life evolved, she ended up getting caught for some of her activities.
Mm.
So in that sense, and without giving too much more about the concept of remote viewing people away. That was my experience. Now, in standard remote viewing sessions, you have a column in the CRV stage 4 matrix called emotional impact. And that is where you feel and perceive the people at the site. Along with that, you have a stage 4 column called aesthetic impact, which is you. What do you feel about the site? So, in a sense, even though you may not be targeting an individual, let's say you're looking at a Ferris wheel, and you put your pen in the EI column, you start to feel, having fun, happy, excited. You're not setting out to remote view people, but you're getting the human emotion that's coming out of that event. So, myself, like I said, the remote viewing of people, specifically a live person or someone or something, it's not a game.
Sorry, I had to mute myself because the neighbor's dogs are going to town today, and I apologize to the anybody watching this who has to listen to that. I will be muting myself while Russell's talking, just so I can drown out or hide the mask the barking noise of those dogs.
Who let the
But
dogs out?
yeah, I know, it's a constant problem. Um, just I just have to apologize for it and mute myself when the guest is talking. Um, so that's really interesting. I had a bunch of questions about that, but I think we'll leave that there. Maybe we could come back to that question a little bit more later on, um, and talk and just get into the what is remote viewing for those people that may not really know. I'm pretty sure that most people know what it is, but this is my take on it. A human ability that can be accessed by almost everyone. Through proper training and practice, it allows anyone who's trying to use it to perceive and record impressions of people, objects, events, locations across distance, space, and time. While remote viewing is considered a psychic ability, for this exercise, we'll be specifically focusing our attention on the scientific study and operational use of remote viewing in modern day applications. Um, let's see. Jack, that's pretty funny, man. Thank you guys for lightening up the mood because that really does stress me out when those dogs get barking. Um, so, what do you think of my take on the definition of remote viewing, Russell?
That's a great broad description. The actual term was coined prior to Ingo ever going to Stanford Research Institute. And at the time the coin was termed, they were doing experiments where they were randomly, sometimes triple blind, picking out a city, having Ingo perceive that city, the weather, the details, and then after the session, they would look at the city and the temperature and the weather and this kind of thing. So these were what typically could be referred to as out of body experiences. Ultimately, Ingo didn't believe that we were actually in a body, we're associated with one. And by virtue of that, you can perceive beyond the physical sensations and perceptions of your own body. So there were two doctors there working with him, and they started to say, what should we name these experiments? The term remote viewing came up. Ingo also suggested remote sensing because viewing is not your only perception. When you're doing a session, you're getting sight or getting sounds, smells, tastes, textures, emotions. So there's a whole range of perception that's not just visual or viewing per se. The scientists piped in and said, after all, what we're doing is we are viewing distant locations. So the term remote viewing stuck. Later, as things evolved, remote viewing actually became the definition of a protocol. So that protocol is that essentially that's being done intentionally. It's being done with documentation. It's being done, um, although not always, but it's generally being done double blind. And there's a session report, and then there's feedback. And Ingo was an absolute stickler about instant feedback through the training phase of remote viewing, so that if you draw a mountain and you get a picture of a mountain as feedback, that instantly rewards and informs your system that's the way to do it. When you get into a term like controlled remote viewing, that's actually more of a method. So remote viewing is an umbrella of a protocol, and with under that umbrella are various methods.
Got it. Very good. Thank you for expounding on that. So the topic of tonight's discussion is the history of remote viewing, and because this program was developed in secrecy and used by the intelligence community primarily as an intelligence gathering tool, much of the documentation and records uh, are vague and redacted. Um, so there's the information has been out in the public for some time, but there's still more information that could be classified,
Yeah.
and
Oh, I'm sorry.
a lot of that information, um, a lot of the historical information seems objective, and because of that, there are different opinions on the history of this, and I encountered this firsthand. Um, it's a little bit frustrating and it's sometimes confusing to try to get through this material because if you read, you know, one person's uh, perspective on the history, and then you read somebody else's, they're a little bit different. There's variations in it, and that's what I'm getting at. So, with that in mind, what we're presenting tonight, I am personally making no claims that the information is definitive or comprehensive in any way. And if you feel that way, Russell, you can chime in. But
Oh, I'm with you. It was so convoluted, so imposed upon by bureaucracy, human motives. The true expert on the logistical history is Paul Smith. He is the unit historian, and the quintessential book on that is called "Reading the Enemy's Mind," which one can get on Amazon. But the outline that you're going to present maybe as confusing to me as it is to you. So we'll just walk through it and see what you got.
yeah, I did manage to nail down a few details from government documents. So those I'm fairly confident that those are accurate. But what I would like to do is put a caveat out there that anybody who has additional information that I may leave out, and Paul Smith, I'm certainly would love to talk with him about it at some point and get his firsthand knowledge on the topic. But again, I just want to make it clear that this is not a comprehensive or a definitive examination of remote viewing. A lot of it is my opinion, and you know, from Russell's perspective, he's done a lot of research on the areas that he's going to go into in depth. So I'm fairly confident that he is well versed in that information. So with that, um, I'm going to take you down a little bit of a historical path about remote viewing, um, because it's an interesting the era that it was developed in and brought to the military, the U.S. military, was an interesting time. It falls into the period of the Cold War, which is my area of interest. Um, I've said this many times. It's the reason it's the topic that I started this podcast on is the Cold War. In 1971, which is actually 50 years ago. I just realized that today that, we're talking about the history of remote viewing. The program wasn't started in 71, but that being 50 years ago was pretty significant because that's when, uh, um, first of all, the Vietnam War was going on. Disco music and bell bottom pants were, in fashion. Humans had walked on the moon. Demonstrators were marching on Washington and San Francisco in protest to that war. And the Soviet Union and US space programs had both sent probes to Mars by this time. But in a lab in New York City, a gifted psychic named Ingo Swann, accented by my neighbor's dogs, thank you to those dogs, Ingo Swann began experimenting with psychic protocols, which he later refined and adopted for the remote viewing program. He was working at that time with uh, Cleve Baxter on psychokinesis, Gertrude Schmeider on out of body experiences, and he was working with the American Society for Psychical Research on weather predictions, and that's where the term remote viewing was adopted, which Russell illustrated a little bit earlier. By 1972, the U.S. Army Surgeon General and the DIA had been studying the Soviet Union's use of psychoenergetics. They had a program that was basically would later become our remote viewing program, but the Soviets were already using it. So a paper was published in 1972 based on that study. And I think as a result of that, now this is where it gets a little vague, but I think as a result of that, the CIA picked up the torch at that point and contracted SRI to study and basically um, develop a research and development program to study the aspect of remote viewing, and that's where Hal Puthoff um, and a physicist was brought into the program and or funded, and then he approached Ingo Swann, who he knew, and they did the magnetometer experiment. Now Russell Targ was also involved in SRI from the beginning, um, but that's where the program first got started. It was funded by the CIA, and the Stanford Research Institute was uh, the body or the organization that was doing the experimenting, the study, and then providing the CIA with that information. How am I doing so far, Russell? Do you have anything to add to that at that point, up to this point?
Oh, you're doing great. One contextual thing that's kind of important. That was also the inception of the New Age period, culturally speaking. So transcendental meditation, other things have moved their way toward our culture, and there was a lot more interest and a lot more substantiation of these matters of perception and the ancient yogic traditions. And some of the people involved, if you go back and look at some of their pictures, actually kind of had a little bit of a hippie thing, and they had a little pad off of SRI where they would get together and speculate, and so that was a big part of the ambient culture at that time as well.
Yeah, that's a good point. Hippies were definitely a big part of the culture. There was also, it was probably happening before this, but in the 70s is when you started to see a lot of LSD.
Mm.
Um, the uh, psycho, what is that term for LSD?
See, I
Um,
don't know anything about LSD at all.
yeah, I studied the MK Ultra program, But after doing all of this research on the remote viewing project, which, oh, it's interesting, something I didn't include in my notes, but I saw on one of the one of the articles that I read, Sidney Gottlieb, who was he worked for the CIA. I think he was a private contractor working for the CIA. He was involved in the MK Ultra program, but he was also involved in the early stages of remote viewing, which really surprised me and I found very interesting.
Well, that's one thing. There's definitely various perspectives on, but the main one was that he tried to get his hands in it and was refused.
Ah, okay, got
So
it.
remember back then too, Jacques Vallée was at the Stanford Institute with Terminal Number Two, from what we now know as the Internet. There were Air Force interest getting funding for this program. So there was a whole bunch of factors that came together perfectly. And then Ingo was invited, as you said. People in officialdom had their doubts. And then when Hal brought Ingo down to the magnetometer, and that worked, word spread fast. And that's when everybody suddenly had a substantial interest in pursuing this.
Right. And then the program continued with successes. So in 1973, they brought in Pat Price, who was an exceptionally talented psychic with an uncanny accuracy for remote viewing. He was a natural psychic, and he was a former police commissioner from Burbank, California, and he had been using his psychic abilities basically to spot criminals or crimes that were going on and dispatch his units to those locations. Um, and he was pretty successful at that. But then when he came into the remote viewing program, he had some amazing successes in that program. I, I'm not going to get into it that much in depth at this point. But do you remember the some of the successes that Pat Price had while he was in the program?
Yes, the thing that a lot of people don't really realize, the really first kind of what you would have to call remote viewing was when Ingo was asked to remote view the moon. And he did this through methodologies he had learned prior to even ASPR. One common denominator between Hal, Pat Price, and Ingo Swan was that they had all been long term Scientologists. There's another person that was involved in the original research team that was a Scientologist, but they've never come out, and so I won't say their name. And then actually later, Ed May, who became heavily involved in the programs, also was a Scientologist. So the method they were using, that Pat and Ingo primarily were using, was just to place your intention on something, intend to see it, and then describe it. So Ingo, when he described his methodology at that time in penetration, he didn't even close his eyes. He would just sit in a chair, wide awake, and when Axelrod told him to tune into the lunar surface, that was just a very simple, direct process Ingo had. Pat Price used the same method. In 1973, interestingly enough, Pat Price looked at the UFO phenomena on Earth. So, strangely enough, a couple of the first projects involved that type of topic. Especially at that time, there was not so much feedback on those kinds of things. Now, when you go to the famous story of Pat Price being asked to view a cabin in the woods, and presumably finding the cabin boring and not so interesting, went over the hill to the other side and found an underground national security agency facility. And when he was able to describe the contents of the folders and the file cabinets, code names, that also generated a significant amount of. Someone asked for my mic to be closer. Is that better? I
Yeah,
can't
that's
see
much
their.
much better. Thank you, Russell.
Oh, okay. I'm sorry. I had no idea. So that also stirred a lot of interest.
Right, and I wasn't even thinking of that. I was thinking of the he remote viewed a like a swimming pool in Palo Alto, I believe it was, and he identified two towers at that swimming pool that
Mm-hmm.
were not there. But then they later found out that 50 years earlier that those towers actually were in that location. And that's when Russell Targ realized that time was was you had to specify the time frame in your tasking. So that
Yeah,
that
that could be. I'm not sure if there's anything prior to that lesser known, but in a way that could be considered the most publicized, what we now call displacement.
correct. That's true. And okay, so can you talk a little bit about that since we're on that topic right now? The the displacement
Displacement,
of the time.
yes. Now I have my own interesting experience with displacement. I had a accurate session on a particular facility, just an ordinary facility, nothing military or anything like this, in a training session. And when I was making my clay model, I had to have the little trucks and little awning coming out from the building, and it really turned out quite nice. Just a little bit away from that, I just had to build this big smokestack thing. And when I got the feedback photo, there was no smokestack there. Then when I did some extra looking at the internet, sure enough, right in that exact location, like in the late 1800s, early 1900s, there in fact was a smokestack there where I put it. So it felt to me, at least at my level of ability, to be as present at that site as the building was. I didn't have a sense of time differential. How that occurs, so many people are researching, trying to figure out. But yes, specifying in the tasking what precise time does the tasker want the viewer to view is a very important thing. I was originally trained in TRV to view at the time the feedback photo was taken and basically view it from the vantage point of the photographer. When I got into Paul's training, he had to break me of that, and he prefers that unless otherwise instructed, the sessions be done in real time. And that can be interesting. You do a session and it's light outside your house, but I'm getting dark and I'm getting cold and I'm getting windy, and and then you're just like, oh, and then all of a sudden you look at the feedback and you're reviewing, let's say, Germany 8 hours ahead of yourself. So there it was dark. And now that I've been able to view and confirm in real time, when I get tasked to the past, and remember, I don't know the tasking, I sure enough view the past. So I was given an archaeological site with really, one of my better sessions ever with really accurate results. So even though you can slip in time, even though I've been trained to default to viewing in present time, even when you get a hitting tasking, you can view in the past and to some degree the future. How that works, if I knew that, I would be selling books for sure. There's something about the information of the past existing at the same time, the presence obviously existing because you can knock on your desk, and the future kind of exists. So in other words, if you roll a ball down a hill, you know that in 1 second that ball will be 6 inches further ahead than it is. That you know. But if the ball goes down the hill and then a little wind kicks up and then it hits a rock, and by the time it gets to the bottom of the hill, your speculation on where that ball is going to land up is about zero.
So the idea of time in remote viewing, uh, uh, when you are tasked with remote viewing, you're supposed to remote view that target as it exists in your time, unless it is specified in the tasking to remote view it in the past. Is
Well,
that kind of what you were saying?
I don't know how all the instructors do that. I know my original instructor wanted you to view at the time of the feedback image, essentially via the photographer's point of view. So, Paul, for your training sessions, and that involves all the so when you do 6 days of basic, 6 days of intermediate, 6 days of
So let me just
advanced.
ask you, instead of going into that into
Sure.
depth, what in your opinion is a more productive method?
Well, you have to define what you're trying to achieve.
Yeah.
In training, your first training is always monitored. And this is so when I say Paul is the
No, I don't
he's
mean
carried
I
Ingo's
don't
methodology.
I'm not asking you to critique the different training programs. All I'm asking you is, in one instance, you're told to remote view the photograph at the time that it was taken. In the other instance, you're tasked with remote viewing the target at the time that you are in at this moment.
Right, but you have to differentiate 2 stages of training and then operational. And I can only speak to Paul's training. I don't know how the others. So Paul, for your training purposes, so for all the sessions you do in each of the courses and then the 30 homeworks that you do over the course of time, he wants you to just automatically view in real time at the
Okay.
time of the
Okay.
session.
So
Now,
yeah, that was kind of an unfair question. So let's just move on from that, because
okay.
that's really, I don't want to get into which training program is better than the other. That's not our goal here. Um, but the idea of remote viewing for archaeological digs is something that I have heard about before, and it's something that has taken place since the beginning of the program.
Hmm.
Um, how effective is that, the remote viewing of archaeological digs?
That's some of the most effective work I've done. That past viewing of the World War II historical figure, a archaeological site, an archaeological dig, and a couple of other things that are still under non-disclosure. The past to me, I don't know why, but I really do well with it, and I really enjoy it. There are other people again. Each of them has their own affinities and their niches. So someone might not have that experience. I don't know if it's because I know the past is already there, it's done, it's solidified as information somewhere, and that's why it's easier to connect. But generally speaking, across the board, people will tend to tell you that viewing the past is a lot more accurate than efforts to view the future. And the present is very simple.
Mhm. Rodrigo says that the original remote viewers were randomly encountering what we describe as gray aliens, and that is something that I've only heard um, briefly, because a lot of the remote viewers, other than Courtney Brown and Ed Dames, a lot of several of the remote viewers don't really talk about it that much. What did, in your experience, have you ever experienced uh, aliens when you were remote viewing?
Well, let's go back to the program first. So from Pat Price's original work on uh, extraterrestrial presence on Earth established in underground bases, Skip Atwater took Joe McMoneagle, who was the best, like completely natural, spontaneous, didn't use a structure, didn't require CRV, and did amazing work. So he viewed, in particular, these four bases through extended remote viewing. Then that project was put away from 1982 to 1985, and Skip decided to test the brand new CRV trained remote viewers, the first class of Ingo. And so they had interesting encounters. Mel Riley had the most apt description and sketches of these beings that he perceived. Bill Ray and others. I won't go into everybody's details, but
Well, in Ingo's book Penetration, he was he talks about a secret meeting that he had where he was tasked to remote view the moon. And while he was on the moon, he ran into some aliens. They weren't gray aliens, but
no,
they were definitely not human. When he was remote viewing them, they noticed him,
yes,
and that's what he said. He had sensed that they noticed him. They turned around and looked his direction, but they couldn't actually see him because he wasn't there. But they did notice him, and according to the book, he said that they were starting uh, to telepathically try to pinpoint where he was at. So he
yeah,
left real quick. In fact, the person that was tasking him to do that told him to leave immediately.
right. And he went back to the moon again. That document's just come out of the estate. There's another remote viewer that's going to be in charge of the release of that. Ingo spoke briefly about it at a UFO conference. When he went back the second time, he demanded to know what was going on, how he was kicked out the first time, and actually went into what appears to be a dialogue with the presence there, which
Wow.
he ended up describing more as humanoid.
Okay.
So, in the history of the remote, there was a number of viewers that perceived entities and a number of viewers that believed they were also in turn being perceived.
Yeah, Rodrigo, that book I haven't finished reading it. I did get to the part with the triangle craft. Fascinating book, man. It's so interesting. And according to what Russell was just saying, with the estate releasing new information, I guess we're going to get to hear some more interesting experiences that Ingo has had.
Yeah,
Uh,
the primary one that will be very interesting is a 28-page session that Ingo did with a monitor to the moon. And there was also a project called Project Moondrop that a bunch of viewers from the program Ingo had recruited them to do viewing of the moon. As an example, there, Paul had a sense of a very strange environment and some sort of a craft flying over his head, some sort of a sense that they had um, at least were rudimentarily aware of his presence. And Paul did, a heck of a sketch of that craft. When you look at that sketch and a bunch of the other sketches, Tom McNear had an encounter with beings on Mars. Joe McMoneagle had an encounter with beings on Mars. So it does seem that these ET or interdimensional, I don't know what you want to call them. I don't know what they are, but these intelligences, whether they're associated with a body type that's different than ours, or whether they're not in a body or not physical at the time, they really do seem to be aware of another being's attention or presence placed on them.
yeah, so I guess Rodrigo, you were accurate in that statement that the original remote viewers we're randomly encountering gray aliens or non-human intelligences. I think NHI is the term that's a little bit more appropriate because they're different type of entities in different instances. So different viewers are seeing different types of entities other than humans. So there's more than one apparently.
And there was some uniformity between the other entities detected by a large. There was a lot of people that worked on the underground base project,
Yeah, and you did
and
it. What? Let's just plug that right now because you did a fantastic overview of the underground base remote viewing uh, that went on during the original program. And
yes,
I would encourage everybody to check out your channel, Direct Perception on
yes,
YouTube.
direct perception is my YouTube channel,
Yeah, and
and there,
check out that video specifically because he did a great job on that.
yeah, and there, Rodrigo, you'll actually be able to see a couple of sketches of Mel Riley, and for the most part, in more than one occasion, they found two types of beings: these smaller automaton type ones that didn't appear to have telepathy, and the viewers couldn't pick anything up. But these other beings, Pat Price described as just having different hearts, different lungs, different eyes, otherwise very human looking. And then Mel Riley did some sketches of both types of beings. So the smaller ones seemed to be not telepathic, and then the other ones that were in charge were definitely telepathic because they were the ones that interacted with the viewers.
Uh, Not long ago, I did an episode with Preston Dennett
Mm-hmm.
about hidden UFO bases on Earth,
Mm-hmm.
and I referenced the video and the work that those remote viewers did in that episode as well. Um, and it really gives me this idea or this feeling that whatever these UFOs that we're seeing, you know, all the time. I've never seen one, but a lot of people have seen them. Whatever those things are, I think that they may be coming from other planets. They may be coming from other dimensions, other times. But I think that a lot of them are already here, and they're occupying those bases, whether they're inside of a mountain, under the ocean, in the Antarctic. I think that those bases have been here for millennia, way longer than we have been um, smart enough to realize what that these things are around. For some reason, we just ignore them. Thanks,
Well,
Rodrigo.
and also
Rodrigo says
I
he
would
agrees with me.
I would say that they have put some effort at obfuscating themselves. It's not like they now lately, when you look at these new Navy videos and a lot of this discussion, it seems like, hey, here I am, videotape me. So
Yeah,
maybe we've reached a point, or maybe it's a different group. I can't say. I wish I did know. I paid close attention to it, but I agree with you. They've had a presence here for a very long time. A good portion of that now seems to be undersea, and then mountains do seem to be the desirable location for hiding themselves. So when you look at even contemporary remote viewing sessions, you see Lori Williams having found something inside Mount Shasta. You look at a couple of these new TV shows that are looking at Mount Hayes in Alaska. Lori also did a session on Mount Hayes for a TV show. You look at Lynn Buchanan's work in some of this area. He had interactions. Joe McMoneagle had interactions in addition to the Mars scenario. So I think they've been here a long time. I think they have developed their psychic abilities. And if you really want to go to the bottom line of what Ingo thought it's them, or at least one faction of them, that's trying to inhibit and slow down our psychic development to their benefit.
wow.
And Lynn Buchanan highlights that almost better than anybody when he talks about the four different types of aliens, and finally says that the unfriendly telepathic ones do not want us developing our abilities, which Ingo, in more than one occasion, stated very clearly that they would prefer we didn't wake up and see them. And that may be just an earth-based thing, or it may be just a bad neighborhood thing, or it may be just a small gang, if you will, or a group of malicious ones. I'm not ruling out the possibility of benevolent ones. In fact, I think they're probably going to be more prolific throughout the entire universe. But what we're dealing with right here, right now, I'm inclined to think we should have a high skeptical barrier coming up. One thing, I'll throw one more thing in. I had the good fortune of meeting Hal Puthoff at the IRVA convention in 2018. The last chair available at a table of like 30 people was right across from him, and damn near killed myself getting in it. And I had a lot of dialogue with him there. And then in Paul's classes, Hal's time permitted, you get to have a Skype with Hal. And in our intermediate class, the topic came around to this and his work with TTSA and what it was like to be on the front line of disclosure. I won't go into detail, but his reply was fairly somber, and he seemed, like there was going to be some problematic aspect of that coming up.
Well, we went way off the beaten path, so I'm going to try to bring it back to the historical perspective. Very interesting, very compelling conversation so far. But I want to get back to the historical part of it because, uh, you know, we could talk about aliens and UFOs all day long, man, and that's a rabbit hole that is completely, it's an endless rabbit hole. But so we left off in 1973. Pat Price joins SRI. Um, they're doing some good work over there. They're continuing to get refunded year after year because of their successes. And then around 1975, I'm not sure if you're familiar with this or not. I couldn't find a lot of information about it, but I read in David Morehouse's book um, that Pat Price was snatched away from SRI by the CIA. Something
Right.
like 4 months after that, he died.
I'm not sure
And,
what the time frame is, but yes, he was brought out of SRI and made a private product, if you will, of the CIA.
and then when Pat Price died, CIA cut off funding. That didn't end the
That
program,
that
but
correspondence I'm not familiar with.
yeah, I'm not saying that that was a correlation,
Right.
but because their remote viewer, their number one remote viewer that they were using had died, I don't know if that caused them to cancel the program, but they canceled funding in 1975.
Okay.
So it's just a weird, a weird string of coincidences that occurred, and I'm putting this together from my research. Again,
Sure.
I could be wrong.
The most accurate depiction of that I'm aware of is the film Third Eye Spies by Lance Mungia.
Yes, that's
That
a great movie, and it's free
Yes.
on Amazon Prime right now.
In that movie, if you notice, Russell Targ really seemed to be carrying a burden to make sure Pat Price was acknowledged.
Yes.
And so there's some history in there, some subtle comments made by Kit Green and others that would naturally, in that situation, people would cast some conspiracy speculation. But there were some interesting, verifiable things that were a little bit odd, to say the least. So did he naturally have a heart attack in the hotel in Vegas? Was he heart attacked?
Hmm.
We may never know, but the best synopsis of that, I think, is Third Eye Spies.
Definitely, I totally agree because um, that's it. It does seem like that was like the center focus or one of the big messages that they had
Mm.
in that film was that Pat Price may have died of unnatural causes at the hands of possibly the Soviets. I thought Uri Geller made a really strong argument against that theory, but I mean it's still a possibility. I'm not going to throw it out because we don't know.
Yeah, that one I definitely would relegate to. It's probably going to remain mysterious for a very long time.
Yeah. So anyway, regardless of that, the CIA did cancel their funding. However, the successes of SRI continued. The program continued, and in 1975, the uh, the U.S. Navy conducts a study to evaluate an individual's ability to perceive remote visual stimuli. So the Navy contracted uh, SRI to do some studies. Also, the U.S. Air Force Foreign Technology Division begins funding the program. They funded the program for a similar reason to what the Navy was funding them for. And then in 1977, the Defense Intelligence Agency assumes control of the remote viewing program under the code name Gondola Wish. And that's where the Army gets involved. And there was a hiccup in the budget. They reclassified the program, renamed it to Grill Flame in 1978. The hiccup wasn't in the program. The program was doing fine. It was just the politics of the thing. There were some misconstrued data in the budget. It looked like they were double billing when they actually weren't double billing. They were uh, anyway. We'll move on. The program continued, and then in 1979, the first actual mission was tasked on September 4th of 1979, and that was to locate a missing Navy aircraft. And the plane was located 15 miles from the area that was identified by the remote viewer. Um, I don't know the details of that. This was off of a government document with just a little, small entry about this. But 1979, the program goes operational uh, within the U.S. Military, within the Army. And then the 1979, the Gale Committee was formed to review the activities of Project Grill Flame. Um, the findings of that committee were that there was enough evidence to warrant further study and funding of the project, so they were off to the races. And I think the program was taken over to Fort Meade. This was the Army. The SRI program was still going on.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and then we get into the 80s. And I'm going to leave it there because we're already an hour into it. And I really want to get into the expanded history. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to break the military operational history of the remote viewing program. I'm going to break this up into several episodes, or a series, if you will. Um, I can either have you come back, or if Paul is willing to come on, I'd love to talk to him and get his perspective and probably a lot more information than what I've shared right here.
Oh
Uh,
yeah, and my knowledge is more of an Ingo history, a philosophy history, and bits and pieces along the path that we've just talked about, which is very critical to understand. But Paul, was officially the unit historian, and man, he could entertain you for hours. So I would definitely recommend him for that.
yes, well, I'm going to try, and with your help, hopefully we could get him on here. But so at this point, the 1980s, we've reached the 1980s with the program. Uh, it's in full swing with the Army. The SRI program is still going on. The funding, the money's flowing in, but we're going to take a sidestep. We're going to sidestep right here and talk about the expanded history of remote viewing. So, what do you got for us? I'm gonna let you, you know, explain a little bit about what that is, and then I'll ask you some questions off the cuff.
Okay, sure. I will just quickly fast fill in just one little spot you were just about to touch. In 1981, when Ingo and Tom McNear started working together to develop controlled remote viewing, that went through a period of time, 3 years or so, and once they developed the stages, there was amazing success. Tom McNear was naming targets, and it really caught wind there. And then after that, Ingo trained one more class of 4 people, only from stage 1 to stage 3, and then they went into Fort Meade and trained out the rest of the stages with Skip Atwater and Bill Ray and the various commanders that were running that situation then. And that's when the full-on operational work started, essentially in 1985. The broader history, we it depends how expanded we want to get, but ultimately it's a history of perception itself. When you look at Ingo's broad spectrum of investigations of life, theosophy, astrology, Scientology, Eastern religions, meditation, avatar. I mean, he never, ever, ever stopped his diligent pursuit of, what is this thing called consciousness? How does it work? He credits Hal Puthoff and 500 people working at SRI for the actual accomplishment, the end product. But in all honesty, without him at the center of it, it wouldn't have happened. It was a unique creation that came almost from his internal experience. Hal has said this, other people have said it. He knew his internal processes very, very well, and he could perceive data and how it worked. And then he consulted with every expert in the world to make this happen. To go back to where Ingo credits remote viewing, it goes clear back to the Yoga Sutras. And the Yoga Sutras were the first written declaration of yoga, which then referred back to oral tradition of thousands of years ago. And in that yogic world, the people saw perception as just the native state of a being. A being just perceives. Somewhere along the line, they took the position that the two things that filter or flavor or alter our perception are memory and imagination. And when it came to CRV, and how could he take regular folks like myself, like a soldier, like anybody, and get them to duplicate that process, CRV is essentially designed around how the mind works. They let the stages appear naturally. They're like, we're doing this, well, this might happen, and boom, that happens. And the real structure aspect of this is to take memory and imagination out of your session and try to perceive accurately. You asked earlier about, time and space. Well, they referred to it as non-local perception. So now we know time space is essentially one concept or one word now. So it's not like you're seeing through time or through space. Somehow, non-locally, you yourself have access to the things we call time and space. So if you look at them as barriers and figure you're trying to poke through them, that gives you a different sense than if I'm non-local, I am non-time. And that's where Russell Targ really makes a impactful statement: undifferentiated awareness. In Ingo's essays, he differentiated between awareness and consciousness. So as a very loose analogy, you and I are aware there's such a place as China, but neither of us is conscious of it right now. Our bodies aren't there, and our minds are not there, presumably. And so we're aware, we know there's a China, but we're not processing data from somewhere in China. So since perception is non-local, and this goes a little bit out on the fringe of my personal theory, then maybe the perceiver is also then non-local. And Russell Park had this concept of undifferentiated awareness, which is not dissimilar to aspects of Hinduism, Buddhism, and other mystical type practices. Ingo knew, and he knew this from his own training, and he wrote extensively about it, and I won't go into the details, but he knew that you as a being could take your conscious mind and take some aspect of it and place it wherever you want it. When he developed CRV, he created the term bilocation. So, in this broader sense of me as awareness, I also then have this mind that I can keep part of it here to do the paperwork of the session, and then some aspect of it goes out there. Now, a lot of people want to say, well, we can't really go in it, that's fine. I respect all of their opinions. But if you take Ingo verbatim, what he's saying is, and he even describes the magnetometer experiment in these terms. If some aspect of his attention did not go to that machine, that detector, what did the detector detect?
Well, I want to add to that just a little bit, because in his book Penetration, he talks about when he went to Jupiter, or
Yeah.
when he remote viewed Jupiter, which is one of his most, I guess, I mean, they were still discovering, um, making discoveries that
Mm-hmm.
he had remote viewed back in, what is it, 1977, or no,
I don't know the date on
it
that.
was in the early 70s when he remote viewed it. But um, they were still making discoveries 10 years later uh, that he was accurate about. But when he described that experience, it sounded like he was actually traveling. His mind was going to that location, and in his own words, as he's describing the experience, it sounds like he was traveling. His
Yeah,
mind was traveling to that location. So it, it it just, that's just a further illustration of what you're saying, that he believes that the mind actually does, part of the mind actually does go to the location to extract data from that location,
correct.
or
And
from the
I
target.
mean, like I say, he knew it. He states it clearly in so many places. Now, other people say, well, we don't know the mechanism. I don't think the actual mechanism of remote viewing is ever going to be detectable any more than the 96% of the missing universe that we call, dark energy, dark matter, whatever. What if that stuff's just too subtle for detection, which apparently it is? We know it's there, but we're not perceiving it. So, what if that is the astral world, or, whatever you want to call these other dimensions and so forth? So Ingo knew and a lot of people forget to consider, if he didn't know some things, how did he create remote viewing and make it work? So he knew some things
Yeah.
and he understood those. And part of it is, as a being of awareness, we have the ability to perceive through consciousness. And so when you look at an astral body or a spirit body or an energy body, it has a mind in it the same way our physical body has a brain in it. As above, so below. So that mental energy body, astral body, spirit body, soul, it doesn't matter what you call it, it has an intelligent structure embedded in it that we refer to as mind. So if we can learn to intend, to want to see, to actually place some aspect of our attention and consciousness at a place, and then operate the other half as the receiver and the documenter, that really, in a nutshell, is remote viewing as Ingo understood it and taught it. Now, how do you explain that? You don't. You just simply have to say it's an operational philosophy. I can operate the machine, but I can't explain every single cog and gear and internal mechanism that makes the machine work. So when
Well,
you,
I could equate that to the power of prayer.
sure,
There's no way to measure how prayer works, but people pray and things happen.
right,
Whether that's a coincidence or not, it's there's no way to dispute that I prayed about something and something happened,
yeah. And
right?
there are accounts of people being aware of being prayed for. So they're just sitting somewhere and they're like tears and they're like, oh my gosh, um, I think my church is praying for me or somebody's praying for me.
Real quick, thank you for that comment, Bill. This video is going to be up permanently on this channel. So anybody that you think might be interested in watching it that can't be here right now, please share it with them. Uh, just help us spread the word because this is important information. It's helpful information, um, and yeah, we want to get the word out. We want as many people to hear this as possible because these things are the the world we live in. This is something that I say often. It is far stranger and much more wondrous than we can even imagine. Okay, we live in the physical world, and a lot of people just focus on that physical world. What you can see, what you can touch. But if you look beyond that and you experience the world as it's meant to be experienced, it's a much more mysterious and interesting place to be. Just
Yeah,
go out in nature and experience nature, and you'll know what I'm talking about. I'm a
absolutely.
nature dude, man. I love to go outdoors. And when I'm outdoors, almost every time I'm outdoors, I have, I guess, what you could call a spiritual experience,
Mhm.
And I don't, I can't, I've never been hypnotized. I have a really hard time meditating. I even have trouble reading books because my mind is always doing 10 different things at once. But when I go out into nature and I experience the outdoors, man, it's just such a relaxing, peaceful experience that to me that has to be a spiritual experience.
Well,
So yeah,
and absolutely. And Bill's a great guy. He attends a lot of the Friday Zoom chats that Dad Smith puts on, which I've seen you pop into a couple lately, which are very dynamic and a lot of opinion, a lot of diversity is expressed there. So Bill shows up there and he's always a hoot to interact with. But back to your prayer thing, okay? So prayer, what is it? You're thinking about someone. So let's say you want to pray for your grandmother. So you're thinking about your grandmother, you're placing your attention, you wish or intend or want something to benefit her, bless her, enhance her life, heal her. How does your grandma know that you were praying for her? It happens. How does a mother know that their child just broke their arm? How do twins know? So all of this stuff, a lot of it is just really built in, and we're overcomplicating and over mystifying it. Where if we have the ability to place our attention at anywhere, anytime we want, and that once we learn to bring that information back to ourselves and then describe it, that's the process in a nutshell. And the structure that Ingo developed is solely to get memory and imagination out of the picture. And this is what yogis train to do. They'll try to work through, say, a past life memory, or they'll work through discharging their body memory so that their perception is clear. They'll meditate until they have laser beam focus. It's all quite clear and simple, quote unquote. And if you can just take it as an operational philosophy, surrender to the fact you may never be able to detect or describe the mechanism, and just do it. Just do it.
so shifting gears just a little bit,
Sure.
one of the things that I've heard uh, some remote viewers say is that, well, first of all, not everybody is born with a natural, or everybody's born with a natural psychic ability. Not everybody experiences that psychic ability. With remote viewing, almost everybody can experience that psychic ability to tap into and see something beyond your physical perception. But
I
I'm
have
sorry.
not seen anybody, and I've done first time sessions, watched first time sessions, seen brand new people sit down. I have not seen anybody that didn't have some correspondence to the target. Ingo absolutely believed that every being had this as an innate ability.
Yes,
And
I've
we,
I've heard that. I have
yeah,
heard other people that have tried it and failed. That doesn't mean that they don't have it. It just means that they haven't tried it enough times, or they haven't tried the correct, the best method for their
or their expectations were
experience.
too high too
Yeah.
early.
So,
So
but
if
my
you,
point was, what I was getting at
yeah,
was that I've heard some people, some remote viewers who were not psychic prior to adopting remote viewing.
hmm
Once they got it down to where they were good enough to become operational, they started experiencing strange, uh, like what some people would call paranormal activity.
absolutely.
That happens.
Oh, Ingo did an incredible interview with Art Bell, where Art Bell asked him the question. So, Ingo, I've heard that some of the viewers, when they started doing this, started to encounter blah, 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 including entities. And Ingo's like, oh, yes. And I'll send you that when we're done with the interview so you can read it yourself. I did a transcript of it. Ingo just flat out says when you do perceptual training of any kind, it could be meditation, could be this, could be that, you're going to open windows. Your perception is going to expand. It's happened to
Okay.
me in remote viewing. So the analogy that I like the best is like, okay, so let's say the tree in my yard is remote viewing, and I really want to remote view the tree. When I open the curtain to look at the tree, I see the fence, I see the lawn, I see your neighbor's dogs. No, just teasing you. I see the cats, the squirrels, right? So when you look out the window, you see everything. You can hone your attention on the tree, but you so Ingo, it was such a brilliant articulation of it. But yes, you're 100% correct. Your peripheral vision can widen. You can start to have spontaneous intuitions. Paul talked about finding parking spots as one of his little knacks now. I've had all kinds of interesting little, like like one day, for example, don't go that way, went a different way, and when I got to the intersection I would have from the other way, there was just a massive horrible crash with person pinned in the car, four cars involved, and I'm literally like 100 feet away. And I can't say if I would have got there at the time of the crash, but it made a difference. Why did that come into my mind? Where did it come from? I don't know. I'm glad it did. So yes, absolutely, when you increase your perception, you're going to see more of everything.
That's interesting. Uh, we can talk more about that a little bit later. Santa Maria 5248 asks, some of the stuff you guys are talking about reminds me of neurolinguistics programming. I'm curious if Russell sees similarities between the two.
In a way, yes, but I would go more towards the broader concept of neuroplasticity. So neurolinguistic programming utilizes neuroplasticity. So, in this sense, when Ingo was trying to co create and work with people to create a structure, he wanted to find the natural path that the mind, brain, body processes information along that path. And when they started to find these stages and when they started to teach it, Ingo would do a lecture. Then he would have tangible, maybe field trips or hands on things. He would have you write an essay and he would have you do it. And the whole rule is for at least the first 6 months minimum, just do the structure. If you're incorrect about the end result, so what? Build that neuro pathway, or what could be called in one branch neuro-linguistic programming. So he believed that the mind could order information. So think of that as software, and that then it could write that information on your hardware, your brain. And that's why a lot of remote viewers report that over a period of time of doing this, those pathways for information processing, since they're hardwired in and softwared in, they'll act spontaneously. You could maybe look at something over here and just get a strong impression that prior to developing those abilities and wiring them into your system, you just simply wouldn't have perceived.
David Powell says Russell has helped mentor me personally, especially right up to and before my basic training, and it paid off in spades. Thank you for sharing that, David. That's a
talk
great.
About a tough customer, boy. Woo. No, I'm kidding. David worked his behind off, had a vision, determined that he was going to achieve this goal, and sought out some assistance, and it was minimal assistance. And he persisted. He did the homework. He took the beatings, if you will. And man, after the first week of basic, now like he's producing better work than I do. His sketching
nice.
is incredible. It might be that in a few months I'm going to have to reciprocate and ask him to give me some lessons.
That's cool. Let's see. Pontiac's progeny. I think bilocation may help explain this. Okay, so where are you on bilocation?
It's absolutely real. Absolutely real. In fact, I'll tell you a little bit of a story, and if Paul hears this, he can send me a nasty email later. I had been arguing with him to some degree over time about bilocation. And
hold on, Russell. Sorry, real quick. Can just in case anybody doesn't understand what that is, could you explain what it is?
Oh, bilocation is you, the being able to operate your mind non-locally in two separate locations at the same time. So let's say, so the way Ingo had it was he wanted it essentially 50-50, not to go completely out of body, if you will, and travel the way he described his trips to Jupiter, to Mars, and to that, but that you could keep 50% of your mind here doing your paperwork and send the other part out to do the perceiving. So bilocation is just simply you being able to, I mean, if I put my left hand out here and it's cold over here, and I put my right hand out and it's warm over there, I can feel the difference. So technically, I'm in two locations. It's the same with the mind.
Okay.
And so Paul had, how shall I say, discouraged me from my particular belief in that. And then the other night on Coast to Coast, he, a few days before, had gone to Ingo's archives in Georgia. And he called me before he was going to the archives, and I'm like, I'm so jealous. So he went there, requested a bunch of his documents that Ingo had stored, and found the lecture that Ingo had given him on bilocation when he was a student. And then on the radio show, he said, well, I'm going to have to apologize to 25 years worth of students. So then I private messaged him, and I said something, and he goes, you're a very graceful winner. And,
well, you know what, though? In all fairness, props to Paul for admitting to his error. I mean, it takes a huge courage, especially to come out publicly and admit that you were wrong about something.
Oh yeah, no, he is.
That's awesome.
He updates with new information, total humility. If he retracts something, he does it publicly. No, in that respect, you can't fault him. He's just straight up, and he's
so many people will, especially in the scientific community, they will stick to, their dying day, to their story. I just want to say again, thank you to Joffrey more people should be listening. And I absolutely agree, Joffrey, and thank you for that. So, and again, this show is going to be archived on YouTube forever unless the channel gets banned. Hopefully, it doesn't. I don't think we're talking about anything, negative or too controversy, but you never know, man. I've heard some interesting things about remote viewing that it is, in some cases, being shadow banned on through search engines and things like that. Um,
Yeah, and regarding Joffrey, there, Joff also took all five of the same classes with me, um, from basic through advanced operational sketching. He took one additional course on the associative remote viewing. So we've trained every minute, suffered every minute, stayed awake bitching about essays every minute. So good to see you out there, Joff.
Good, yeah, and thank you for being here, man. Thanks for checking out the show. Uh, if you're new here and you want to get more of this show, I don't normally do this, but I'd like to plug it and hit that thumbs up, share the program on social media if you can, and subscribe to the channel so you can get more interesting, compelling information. I talk about the Cold War. That's my biggest topic. I talk about UFOs, nuclear weapons, remote viewing. I'm doing a lot more of the consciousness stuff. I have a growing, evolving interest in the remote viewing topic. Um, I'm bringing on people who study. Sorry, man. I'm taking this opportunity to plug my podcast, but
Oh no,
um,
you should.
I don't do it often. I usually don't because I like to give the guest the limelight. But
no,
I
you should, because
I really think I need to start doing it more.
you've gotten some incredible guests, and
Thank you.
I followed along way back since we first met and chatted it up and then interviewed. And I'm subscribed to you. We will watch topics that we're interested in. The three of us, myself, my girlfriend, and our housemate, they both like you. They want me to grow a big beard now, and I was like, I just don't know. But anyways, no, plug it away. I
Cool.
do,
Thank you, man.
and I will.
Uh, so with that, like, subscribe, and share the video, and help me grow the channel. And I'll continue bringing you guys good, interesting guests with topics that are, uh, you might not hear everywhere else. There's a lot of people talking about UFOs right now, so you can get that stuff everywhere. Um, but I take a little bit of a different angle on the topics, and I really try hard to cover issues in a way that have not been covered yet. So, and I try to tie everything as much as I can back to the Cold War because that's, to me, one of the most interesting periods in history.
And
Um,
certainly that period had a huge, how can I put it, a huge effect on the creation of remote viewing.
sure,
Like you
absolutely,
said
yeah,
earlier, very briefly, the Soviets had about a 25-year jump, and we're having some pretty remarkable results with perception, with psychoenergetics, telekinesis, if you will. And when that got around and Americans started going, oh, is this real? And we found out it was. That is, the Cold War is what kicked remote viewing into gear for sure.
yeah, yeah. I
Um,
agree. As well as the space program. If it weren't for the Cold War, I don't think we would have had a space program as
right.
aggressive as we had. I mean, it stimulated and influenced so many innovations and so many advancements in technology, science, art. It's just one of the most prolific periods in human history. My opinion, of course, but I will stand by that. Um,
Yeah, with regard to remote viewing, there's no doubt the driving force that the Cold War was. Now, one thing I do want to say too, speaking of plugs, um, okay,
the beard is epic. Grow the channel, grow the
yay.
beard. Oh, thank you,
Well, no,
gentlemen.
Nancy and Catherine love you with your beard. They're like, oh, we
Oh,
like
thank
the
you.
beard, and so mine doesn't grow quite as thick, but I don't know, maybe I'll have to try it. Uh,
Your
so,
beard looks great, Russell. I love it.
so one plug I would like to do for anybody who may be listening now or to the recorded version in the future, if you're interested in a safe, practical, functional landing spot, the place where I interact the most on this topic is at a Facebook group called Remote Viewing slash Remote Perception. Paul was trained by Ingo Swan. He was a Stargate remote viewer, and there's some wonderful Facebook groups out there with a whole variety, but some of them maybe are a little too deep or move a little too fast. So he wanted to create a fundamental group for just the basic person to ask some questions. The practice targets he gives are very safe, responsible, uh, verifiable targets that you can practice. So if you're looking for just putting your foot in the water, obviously I'm biased. I'm a moderator there, but that really is a good, smart, safe place. And then from there, there's groups that want to remote view Bigfoot and alien and every other thing. You can go anywhere. But if you're just landing and you want to check it out in the environment where everything's going to be rational and responsible, come over and visit us there.
Okay, that's a great plug, and the link to that will be in the show notes. I'll try to grab a link for it here in a minute. Let's see. There was, um, oh, Bill. Thank you for your comment, man. But I do not want to get started on the Cold War. As far as I'm concerned, we're already in Cold War 2.0. That I'll save that for. I'll leave it at that and save it for another time. But yeah, I agree with you, man. The Cold War, um, it it was a difficult time. I think it was a period of extreme hardship for a lot of people, but I think out of that hardship came a lot of good. That doesn't mean I want us to be into another Cold War, even though I do think we're already in one. Um, a couple more points from people in the chats. This one, lots of people pretending to be remote viewers and have zero training. I don't think training is required for everybody to be a remote viewer. Um, I think there are natural psychics that can do remote viewing, and they can do it quite effectively, even if it's not with training. Now, I'm no expert, and that's my opinion, but I have talked to people who say that they can do remote viewing, and they have not been formally trained in it. In fact, some of the material that I was reading today kind of confirmed that.
Well,
So,
I will do just a gentle, if you don't mind, pushback on that, just a
absolutely,
tiny bit, and it's this: we have to remember the term has some meaning.
agreed.
So now, yes, Joe McMonagle didn't get trained in a structure, and he's to this day known as one of the best remote viewers ever. Pat Price, having passed away 10 years before a structure, obviously did what he did. And Ingo now was a natural psychic. So why would a natural psychic want to create a protocol? The method is true. What you're saying is true of the method. If you want to practice this method, there's a book out there, natural remote viewing. Ingo had a book, Natural ESP. So those things are out there. But even then, some sort of practical application or instruction is useful. I'm not saying you have to go sign up for this person's course or that person's course or this, that, and the other. You don't. So when we say they don't have training, I mean, even one of the best remote viewers out there operationally today, Daz Smith, he was a natural psychic. And once he found a perceptual structure, he found his work stepping up. So you'll hear a lot of really good people who came from a natural psychic background. So it's a fine line. You can't say, well, that person didn't have any training, they're no good. Myself, if let's say I open a remote viewing company and Andrew comes to me with a perfect 14-page controlled remote viewing structure, but he missed the target. And then someone comes to me and they say, well, I just look at the grounds in the bottom of my coffee cup and this is what I see, and they're accurate. I'm hiring the coffee cup person,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
So there's a balance. The idea is you want accurate data, and training is useful in anything. Drivers training, training in how to eat when you're a kid, training in your alphabet. So, but it doesn't have to be a particular stamped school of thought. Um, so we can't disregard people that don't have training,
Agreed.
but we don't want to dismiss the usefulness of the experience of other people who have formulated things for us to learn from.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And one thing that I'll say that you hit on pretty well, and I just want to like emphasize is that natural psychics who, well, in some cases, natural psychics who have gone through remote viewing training have improved their skills dramatically.
Yes.
Um, that doesn't mean if you have a natural psychic ability that you cannot remote view. Um, just don't go out there and claim that you're a remote viewer traditionally or formally trained remote viewer if you haven't been. That's I think that's where the disconnect happens is that um, it's just I mean this is such a sensitive topic and I think there's a really big rift in the remote viewing community because of it. So it's hard for me to talk about, but I just
And to be fair, Andrew, it's been that way since day one.
yeah, I guess that's
Ingo
true.
was battling it out viciously with people on the other side of the table clear back in 1971.
Yeah. So I
So,
feel like we
so
digressed a little bit. I thank you for bringing up that point,
yeah,
Pontiac. But we're going to leave it there, and then
sure.
we will move on because Rodrigo brought up an interesting thought. Some authors claim that in the past, we as a human species were more developed in these areas, meaning the psychic abilities. Does Russell think we lost those abilities, or maybe they have been suppressed? I'll just caveat Rodrigo's point. Because of our culture, because of the
Yes,
way our lifestyles.
I believe that 100%. And I will plug an Ingo book, if you don't mind. So this book, whoops, it's like dyslexic.
Resurrecting the mysterious.
It's called Resurrecting the Mysterious. And it's Nick Cook, who worked with Ingo's estate and took a couple of unpublished manuscripts and put them into this book. If you want to know Ingo's true, full esoteric spectrum, his beliefs about the possibility of prior biographies or what people call past lives, future biographies, but he has a concept built in there called the enforcer. And the enforcer is this collective of parents and schools and all these things that over time diminish a being's ability, natural ability, and the expression thereof. He also historically has some beliefs that if a spiritual being comes here to Earth, I mean, we have to understand Earth created our body, created our physical, but did it create us? Or did we ourselves say come out of source, come directly out of God into a body? Do we have a prior biography? All these things are obviously up for significant discussion for decades. But Ingo did, and I do solidly believe that there's been an overall deterioration or diminishment of beings, and then in particular, once you get associated with a body and get into the human system, it seems that this Gestalt concept of enforcer is really interested in suppressing the expression of our spiritual abilities.
Cool. So plug that book again.
Oh, it's called Resurrecting the Mysterious.
Resurrecting the mysterious.
It's a
And that's a
but it's a
posthumous publication
it's a
of
good
Ingo's
thick
work.
book. Well, yes, the family took Nick Cook, who's a well published author. Ingo had met with him, done some filming with him, tried to teach him remote viewing, but he just wanted to interview Ingo. He tells that story, but it's a combination of two of Ingo's just basically mystical manuscripts. He'll talk about how The body has a different kind of intuition than the mind. So, like maybe gut feeling versus intuition. He talks about all the dynamics of spirituality. It really, if you're into those deeper questions like Rodrigo appears to be, I think he would enjoy the book.
Yeah. Rodrigo says it's interesting that both science and religion suppress these abilities. I think it's more than interesting; it's tragic,
Yes,
and
and
I think they are both designed that way to
and
be
he has
oppressive.
two more books where he talks about how this happens at least in a single lifetime culture, called The Secret to Power, Volume 1 and Volume 2. And that is a really fascinating study on how 10,000 people can end up ruling 10 million people. And a lot of it's through the manipulation of mind and words and definitions. And uh, so if you're interested in those topics, resurrecting the mysterious for sure, and then I'm sorry, it's called The Secrets of Power, Volume 1, Volume 2. The estate now is making all of those available on Ingo's new website at a much less expensive uh, price than the old copies are going for on Amazon, generally speaking.
All right, cool. So I'm going to start wrapping it up.
Okay.
There was the so near the end of the Stargate program, which it's referred to now, the
Mm-hmm.
military remote viewing. It did have several different code names, um, and we touched on a couple of those earlier. But near the end of the program, it was called Stargate. And they established a I guess a list of successes or successful categories that were demonstrated throughout the program. I just want to read those off. And this is from a document that I found. Again, references or links to all the reference material that I studied to prepare for this show will be in the show notes later. But remote viewing has been used successfully against 7 categories of tasking: penetration of inaccessible targets, science and technology information, queuing of other intelligence collection systems, imminent hostilities, determination of nuclear from non nuclear targets, human source assessments, accurate personality profiles. And that's a little bit, I can't remember who brought that question up, but you had talked a little bit about the remote viewing other people. That's what that's about, remote viewing other people's personality profiles. And you can get an accurate, but again, you stated specifically you don't do that. I respect that. I appreciate that. And I think that would be something that would be a very invasive, very offensive to somebody, to an invasion of privacy to do that to somebody.
Yeah, there's some ethics involved,
Absolutely.
and those should be honored. So what I'm saying is I'll never do it frivolously. If I were to get a tasking from one of the very few people that I'll take a tasking from because I trust them with my psyche, literally, and it should be a person, I would know that there would be some positive outcome from viewing that person, but I would be blind to the tasking, so I wouldn't know.
Yeah.
So it's not something I mean, I'll just put it in plain English. Just don't screw around with it. It's stupid. It's invasive. It's no different than if you could just take the wall off your neighbor's house and get into their private affairs. That it's just inappropriate.
You know what? There was one question. So first of all, let me like just reiterate the list that I just went over.
Mm-hmm.
That's an impressive list
Mm-hmm.
that remote viewing has been used successfully against. This isn't some somebody who just printed up a list. This is from a government document. This is a result of over 2 decades, almost 3 decades of research and scientific rigor that went into this program to come up with these conclusions by the U.S. government. Remote viewing is real. It is not something that is disputable. Again, I promised I wouldn't make any definitive statements, but in my research, I don't see how you can dispute the reality and the effectiveness of remote viewing. I, it's there.
It
So,
it is 100% real. And one thing that Paul will tell you, and if you look at it in there in the archives, and it's a kind of a combination of a couple of those there, but one of the more successful applications of it was in drug interdictions when they did work for the DEA. They would have people describe the boat, where the boat's coming into the shore, and in what compartment the drugs are hidden.
thank you, Santa Maria. Once again, Dead Hand Radio knocked it out of the park. I learn so much every time I tune in. Thank you, Russell, and thank you, Andrew. And
Thank
thank
you,
you,
Santa
Santa
Maria.
Maria,
I
very
appreciate you
much.
being here. Thank you.
So the question I wanted to go back to was a question regarding Lynn Buchanan's remote influencing. Uh, did we talk about that?
No, I've listened to some talks. I've read Lynn's book, The Seventh Sense, and I can honestly say I am not that knowledgeable on it. I believe if I heard correctly at one point, it should be done somehow with the person's consent. And in another more telepathic modality that I'm trained in, it definitely works, but I would not do it without a person's consent.
So
If you
Rodrigo's, there was a little bit more on that question, but a witness from Rendlesham incident, which is the UFO landing in
right, right.
Rendlesham Forest, England. I just say that just in case anybody didn't know what that was. Um, Maybe having been a target of that from the future. Wow, I had not heard about that, Rodrigo. That is fascinating, man. Um,
Yeah, so I get the gist of what he's saying. So no, I'm not at all competent in the methodology that Lynn uses for remote healing. Excuse
Influencing,
me. Remote
influencing.
healing absolutely works.
He's talking about remote influencing.
Yeah. Okay. When you look at the way when Lynn talks about remote influencing by itself, like literally his YouTube video on it has a warning, and he tells you don't mess with this.
Hmm.
Okay, so I did conflate remote influencing and remote healing. Now, Ingo Swann and another, actually, it's in the same Art Bell interview, confessed to Art he had used it 3 times and 3 times only in his entire life. And Art was like, basically for what purpose? And Ingo said something to the effect of people were doing things they should not have been doing. So, do I have a big enough myself? Okay, I'm not Ingo for sure. Do I have a big enough picture of reality to say I'm going to stop this from happening because I know it's going to have a compounding bad effect on the totality of life, the universe, and everything? Or by stopping it, might I prevent something good from coming out of it? So I don't mess with remote influencing or remote healing personally. There are people who are way more knowledgeable on that topic. But yes, it's real. Yes, it can work. And in this other modality of telepathic training, when you work with someone telepathically, maybe for healing or that kind of thing, you get their permission. You don't just go bombing into their mental space and decide what's best for them and start, tinkering. They like if somebody
Right.
came to my driveway, popped my hood open. I'm like, what are you doing? And they've got a toolkit and they just rebuilt my engine.
Yeah, and just to reiterate the question that Rodrigo said was somebody at Rendlesham felt that they had been remote influenced from somebody in the future.
Right. And
That's
that
that's an interesting statement, and if that's true, that is wild.
and Lynn does talk about time loops, and that's something I don't understand and haven't delved into. Associative remote viewing also talks about that same kind of concept. I'm not interested in that. Associative remote viewing. So the past influencing the future and the future influencing the past and all these things. I don't try to even wrap my head around it. If it's all simultaneous or if it's non-local, that could all make sense. But when it comes to time, I'm with the scientists. They don't know what it is. They don't know what gravity is. They don't know what magnetism is. They know how it all works, but they don't know what it is.
Mm-hmm.
And so I just surrender myself to not knowing on some of those matters.
Joffrey John Baptiste says, "Natural psychic here. CRV gives me the tools to open up the target. Training is so important."
And that is true.
Good point.
Joff is a very powerful natural psychic artist, outdoorsman who, in the outdoors, heavily relies on like almost shamanism, nature, intuition, tuning in. What's going on over here? And so I watched him uh, parallel. His remote viewing product was significantly more accurate than mine right out of the gate. And I've also seen him maybe slightly, go astray. And to watch him get it organized into a system of structure, it was it works. It works. And
Well, Rodrigo addressed your uh, answer to his question. Thank you, Russell and Andrew, for covering that question. The story is more convoluted. The specifics make sense, and Russell, your perspective is much appreciated.
oh yeah, and
And
your participation is very appreciated. Thank you, Rodrigo.
um, so with that, let's get some final thoughts,
Okay.
and then oh, so first of all, I shared the link to the Facebook group,
Okay,
Remote
good.
Viewing and Remote Perception. Uh, so that's available, and that'll also be in the show notes. Um, uh, let's see. I'll give the link to your YouTube channel. Go ahead and throw out your final thoughts on what we've been discussing, Russell.
Okay. My final thoughts on this evolve. Where I'm at right now is in my opinion, apart from your relationship to source or God or your creator or however you perceive it, the next most important thing, in my opinion, is perception. If you're not perceiving clearly, you can't even fix a problem. If you're not perceiving clearly, you can't effectively relate to another being. If you're caught up continuously in your own memory and your own imagination, you'll be living in a distorted isolation, if you will, and then trying to apply inaccurate solutions to problems you can't see clearly, this, that, and the other. So at this point in my life, the reason that I stick with remote viewing, the reason that I assist people in remote viewing, and the reason I stay so tough on the topic is perception is important. And if we can all learn to clear ourselves of our own internal junk and just see clearly, if you look at a problem and you're seeing clearly, now you can fix the problem. So I put a high priority. Lots of people will achieve this with no such thing as remote viewing. It'll be meditation. It might be extreme sports. It might be this, that, the other. I don't know. But if you want something fundamental that for the first time in history, through the government programs that Andrew mentioned, is trainable, repeatable, and verifiable. In other words, you can train, you can practice, you can look at your sketch compared to a photo, so it's verifiable, and you can do it again and again and again. And that's what makes remote viewing unique. If you want to say structure in this or training wheels, so be it. I can tell you from a person who wasn't quite as thick as a rock to where I am now, the difference between training and practice um, is huge. I'm living like a crazy dream that I really didn't ever think would come true for me. So find yourself a structure, find yourself an instructor that you have affinity or comfort with, And if you're brand new and you just want to come in and ask questions at Paul's group, um, but do something. If it's meditation, do that. But clear your perception. Try your best to start to see things as much as possible as they are, and then choose a course of action that's going to make the things you see better. That's my soapbox.
Well, cool. Did we miss a question, Pontiac? Because I thought we had covered all of them, but if I did miss one from Rodrigo, repost it and we'll answer it. I don't want to um, leave out anything. We're not trying to not answer any questions. If I missed something, it's because I didn't see it. And while you guys are looking for that question, if we did miss it, my final thoughts are: if you get into remote viewing, don't get wrapped up in the tribalism that is prevalent within the overall community. Get into remote viewing for your own reasons. Stick to those reasons and just be open and understand that other people are in this for their own reasons as well. Don't get hung up on other people's reasons. And that goes true with the UFO community, with just every walk in life, man. That's just sound. Um, I don't want to call it advice because it's a choice. It's a choice that you have to make. You don't want to get caught up in other people's messes. And whenever you get involved in tribalism, you're gonna get wrapped up in somebody else's mess, one way or the other. Just avoid that stuff and get into remote viewing because it's awesome, it's real, and for people that can do it, I haven't been able to do it, but for people that can do it, it's an absolutely mind blowing experience. Is that accurate, Russell?
Oh, yeah. I've openly cried when I've opened feedback or got feedback from an operational session, and I look and I'm just like, how did I, do that? Then how did that happen? And when you see that and it just soaks into you, yes, that happened. I did it. So now the next question is, what else is possible? If this is possible, what else is possible?
Yeah, I wish I could do it. I wish I had the time to dedicate to learning the practice.
Yeah.
Maybe I will. Maybe I will.
Yeah, I mean, for just 19.99, I can get you on the wait. Don't buy now.
Right, right.
Okay, there's Rodrigo's question.
Yeah. Okay, so let me read this off. Rodrigo Vieira. Thank you for your question, Rodrigo. According to Russell, what are the most reliable individuals or groups we should pay attention to?
Yeah,
I'm going to caveat that with because we're talking about remote viewing. So
yeah. The answer to that is I would not dare to um, tell you what's good for you. Now, I am known for some very intense debating within established remote viewing groups where someone will come very hard with an opinion. I'll come back. And like Andrew said, it can go into tribalism. And Paul's always lecturing me on my diplomacy. So that's in established groups where you know the people and you're battling over the finer points of things. In general, you must follow your own path wherever your affinity leads you, the people you feel most connected to, the ones you learn the most from. So I can't tell you, nor would I if I could, exactly who's reliable this. I mean, my perception could be askew on that. So tune in, ask, and you shall receive. And hopefully, and usually I see people end up, and you look, if you get in one group, and I mean, I've taken training from two different instructors. So if you get into a tribe, if you will, and you want to tribe hop and go to another one or this, as an example, there are people who have trained with all of the major remote viewing instructors. One person is trained with them all, and then they do a synthesis of that, or maybe they find the one that's right. So explore, follow your heart, and just don't.
so let's do this, Russell. This is something that I asked Daz on the last program. Um, so for people who want to get started in this, uh, don't it's probably better that you don't look to a particular group of people, but you want to start somewhere. And there's a couple of good books to really get you interested in this topic, to get you on
Yeah.
fire for this topic. What books do you read, or would you recommend somebody read to start out and kind of get interested in this topic?
Yeah. Let me see if I've got that.
Well, if you throw that big um, the Tale of Two Cities out there again, man,
No.
I think you're going to scare people away. That's not a
Oh,
starter
here it is,
book.
right here. Here it is. Okay. Now, this is not because of my bias. When it comes to Paul and training with him and stuff, I am biased, and there's no doubt about that. But this book I'm offering you, even though it's from Paul, is not related to my bias. This one here is called The Essential Guide to Remote Viewing. And this book, I actually keep an extra copy on hand at all times. I've given it to several skeptics. I've given it to several interested people. It handles skepticism. I mean, Paul, is a PhD in theology and world-class philosopher and very logical scientist type. That book right there.
Oh wait, hold that up there again, because we didn't read the title for people listening to the
Whoops.
podcast.
The Essential Guide to Remote Viewing.
By Paul H. Smith.
And you can get this. You can get an autographed copy off of Paul's site, or you can just get a standard copy off of Amazon. So This one, it's so logical, and it shows actual incredible. It shows the Pat Price sessions you were talking about, Andrew, actual session work published. It then explains how to do a simple type of session that can be followed up in Paul's group, where he gives you a you don't need to know anything about remote viewing, and he just gives you a simple session format, and you can post your session in the group, and then on feedback day or shortly after time available, he might make a comment. So that's a
So
really important
question.
Yeah.
Can you literally, with that book, can you come away with it and be able to do remote viewing on a rudimentary level?
No,
Okay.
It's not a how-to book. It'll give you some ideas. This is one to either help you reassure yourself that this is real. It's so well put together on that. Or if you got a family member that says you're crazy. So I've given this book out to probably 6 or 7 people now, and everyone's come back and say, wow, that isn't what I thought it was. This is so cool. So to me, that's the best grounding beginner's book. If you're looking for the subjective books, I mean, I've got so many. I've got like 40 here. I don't know what else to recommend.
Well, I'll throw a book out there.
Yeah.
This was a cool book written by David Morehouse.
Okay, yeah.
Man, I can't remember the name of it. Do you know the name of that book that he wrote?
Well,
Psychic Warriors. Psychic Warriors.
Oh, okay. He had David
no,
Morehouse
put that away, man. Put that away.
He has that one too.
That thing's too thick. We're talking like beginning books, something that'll take.
This is David Morehouse's book on remote viewing. It even comes with a DVD and so forth. But the Psychic Warrior, yes.
Yeah. So there's Penetration by Ingo Swann. That book will blow your mind.
Yeah, I wouldn't recommend that for someone just walking off the street asking about remote viewing, though.
Oh well, that's true. That's true, because it could. It's out there.
Yeah.
But if you're interested in some really esoteric, mind-blowing experiences that somebody really had or claims to have had, I believe him.
If you're going to go shopping for Penetration now, there's original Penetration, then there was Penetration Special Edition, and now there's Penetration Special Edition Updated. Get that one, because it actually has new chapters in it that didn't make it into the first one, and some of the session work from their viewing of Mars.
Okay, cool. Yeah, there's a ton of books out there. There's one by Joe McMoneagle. I don't know the names of all these books, man, because I haven't read all of them. I'm not as as well versed in this topic as you are. But is there anything else that a beginner would find interesting that you can
Well,
think
I
of?
mean, you can find it interesting, but honestly, I mean, there's a free uh, one online written by Ingo. It's totally free. It's called Remote Viewing the Real Story. And Ingo, it's autobiographical in a sense. It tells you each step of his life from being a naturally psychic child to getting into the program to meeting Hal to the whole New York artist life. 500 and some pages, and it's totally free. So if you're interested in that kind of thing, you'll learn a lot about how remote viewing came to be and a lot of uh, things from inside the program are described as well.
Okay, here's the book. Can you read that from Joe McMonagle?
Yeah.
Uh, Memoirs of a Psychic Spy. That's the one that I wanted to mention. I haven't read that yet though. Um, but Psychic Warrior, I did read. Cool book. Um, so that's what I would suggest. That instead of you know getting aligned with these groups online because they are tribal, man. They and then they fight amongst each other. It's could leave a bad taste in your mouth if you're just getting started. You want to get started with the little baby steps, get the interest going. Um, I think Paul's group is probably the safest space um, that I've come across where there's almost no bickering. There's still some bickering, but yeah, I don't think you're going to be able to get away with it. But the cool thing that Paul does on his Facebook group is he'll post targets. Now, I think there's like a moratorium on that for a little while, but he's got dozens of past targets that you can go do for practice.
Well, he's actually got an active target up right now, and the feedback reveal will be on Monday the 5th.
Oh, okay. That might have been something that I saw a while
What
back.
he did was he was doing it every week, and that was during COVID, where he wasn't able to have in-person classes or travel.
Okay.
So as soon as he was able to get his program going again, he reduced it to every other week. And then lately's had a high demand of classes back to back and travel, and so there was like a 3 week delay. But generally, he's trying to do it every other week.
Cool. All right. So with that, appreciate you all being here. Russell, appreciate you very much, my
Well,
friend.
thank you, Andrew.
Hope you
Thank you.
come back again. I hope I didn't offend you too badly this time, and we'll continue our friendship and conversations offline as well as future podcasts
Yeah,
together.
you didn't even come close to offending me. You're going to have to try a lot harder.
Awesome.
And ever since I first met you in our first show, now I enjoy your natural style. I enjoy the fact that you're really asking a lot of questions so you can learn.
Yeah,
You know,
absolutely.
some interviewers are just they already know and they're just at you literally have a natural flow of questions, and I've been very impressed since I met you to now the guests and all the topics you've been through. So I'll look forward to it.
Thank you, man. Well, there's a term the lawyer world, right? When you're in a court case and you're deposing a witness, never ask a question you don't know the answer to.
Yeah.
Well, first of all, this isn't court. I'm not a lawyer, and there's a lot of questions I want the answer to that I don't know, and that's why I love talking to people like you that know more about a topic than I do, so that I can learn something new. Um,
Trust me, I've been at this like 40 some years, and I think my question list has maybe shrunk by two. So
right, and for every question you have answered, 10
yeah,
new questions pop up. Right,
yeah.
there's always something new to learn. So awesome, guys. Appreciate you all being here in the chat room. Thank you. I can't name everybody that's been here, but I do appreciate all of you guys. Um, and with that, we'll call it a night. Have a good
Okay.
evening, everybody.
All right. Happy 4th, Andrew.
Hey, happy Fourth.
All
Yeah,
right. Bye
thank
bye.
you. Bye.